exploring future schools where nature is the teacher. The school of the future did not begin with walls, bells, or rows of desks. It began with the sound of wind moving through tall trees, the quiet rhythm of water flowing over smooth stones, and the steady warmth of sunlight touching the earth. In this new era of education, nature was no longer something students learned about from textbooks. It was the teacher itself. At dawn, students arrived not by crowded buses, but by walking along forest paths, cycling beside rivers, or gliding silently in solar-powered pods that stopped at the edge of green learning zones. There were no gates announcing, "School starts here." Instead, learning began the moment a student stepped onto the land. Sensors embedded in the soil recognized each learner, adjusting the environment to support the day's lessons. Shade expanded where focus was needed, and open fields welcomed collaborative exploration. The classrooms were living spaces. Some lessons took place beneath massive tree canopies where branches formed natural roofs. Others happened beside wetlands where frogs, insects, and aquatic plants demonstrated ecosystems in real time. There were learning caves cooled naturally by the earth, open-air laboratories powered by wind and sun, and floating platforms on lakes where physics and balance were taught through movement. In these future schools, students did not memorize definitions of photosynthesis. They watched it happen. They observed leaves responding to light, measured oxygen levels in real time, and tracked how seasons influenced growth. Mathematics emerged from patterns in pine cones, spirals in shells, and the geometry of honeycombs. History unfolded through the land itself, as students learned how ancient civilizations adapted to climate, terrain, and natural resources. Teachers still existed, but their roles had transformed. They were no longer lecturers standing at the front of a room. Instead, they were guides, mentors, and interpreters, helping students ask better questions and connect observations to deeper understanding. Artificial intelligence assistants worked quietly in the background, translating bird calls into data, simulating future climate scenarios, and personalizing learning paths based on each student's curiosity and pace. Language learning thrived in this environment. Students practiced English not through repetitive drills, but through storytelling inspired by the world around them. A walk through a forest became a narrative exercise. A storm approaching across the horizon became an opportunity to describe mood, tension, and change. Learners spoke, wrote, and recorded reflections as part of their daily interaction with nature, developing fluency through meaningful experience. Assessment in these schools was gentle and continuous. There were no stressful exams held under fluorescent lights. Instead, students built portfolios of real-world projects. One learner might design a self-sustaining garden and explain its system in English. Another might document the migration patterns of local birds, presenting findings through multimedia storytelling. Growth was measured not only in knowledge, but in empathy, resilience, and creativity. Perhaps the most powerful lesson nature taught was responsibility. When students cared for the land that taught them, learning became personal. If water was wasted, its impact was immediate and visible. If soil was neglected, plants struggled. Through daily interaction, learners understood that every action had consequences. Sustainability was not a chapter in a book, it was a lived experience. Technology did not disappear in these future schools. It evolved to support harmony rather than distraction. Wearable devices monitored stress and focus, encouraging mindful breaks. Augmented reality overlays revealed hidden layers of the natural world, showing root systems beneath the ground or constellations during daylight. Yet screens never replaced direct experience. They enhanced awareness without pulling attention away from reality. Social learning flourished as well. Without rigid classroom walls, students of different ages collaborated naturally. Older learners mentored younger ones, explaining concepts through shared exploration. Cultural exchange programs connected nature-based schools across the world, allowing students in rainforests, deserts, mountains, and coastal regions to share stories and perspectives in a common language. As seasons changed, so did the curriculum. Winter emphasized reflection, writing, and long-term planning. Spring focused on growth, experimentation, and innovation. Summer encouraged exploration and ambitious projects, while autumn became a time for synthesis, connecting ideas and sharing knowledge. Education followed the rhythm of life, rather than forcing learning into an artificial schedule. Parents noticed changes too. Children returned home calmer, more confident, and more curious. They asked thoughtful questions, told vivid stories, and showed deep respect for the environment. Learning no longer felt like a burden, it felt like discovery. In these future schools, success was not defined by competition or rankings. It was defined by understanding, connection, and purpose. Students learned how to learn, how to adapt, and how to care for themselves, for others, and for the planet. As the sun set behind the hills and the day's lessons quietly came to an end, students gathered to reflect. Sitting in circles on the grass, they shared what nature had taught them. Not just facts, but wisdom. They learned that the world is always speaking, always teaching, if one is willing to listen. And in that listening, education finally returned to its oldest and most powerful classroom, the living earth itself. As the idea of nature-based future schools spread across the world, entire communities began to reshape themselves around learning. Cities redesigned unused concrete spaces into green corridors connected to these schools, ensuring that education was not separated from daily life. Markets, homes, libraries, and learning zones blended seamlessly, creating an ecosystem where curiosity never had to stop at the edge of a classroom. Morning lessons often began with silence. Students sat quietly under trees or beside streams, practicing observation before action. They learned that attention was the foundation of understanding. By noticing the smallest movements, a leaf trembling, an ant carrying food, clouds shifting shape, they trained their minds to focus deeply. This habit later translated into stronger reading comprehension, clearer speaking skills, and more thoughtful writing in English and other languages. Science education reached a new depth. Weather was no longer just a forecast on a screen, it was a living laboratory. Students tracked wind patterns with handmade tools, predicted rainfall by observing animal behavior, and compared their findings with AI-supported data models. When predictions were wrong, failure was welcomed as part of the learning process. Nature, after all, rarely followed perfect rules. Art and creativity flourished naturally. Music was composed using natural rhythms, dripping water, rustling leaves, and bird calls. Students wrote poems inspired by moonlight reflecting on water, or by the quiet strength of ancient trees. Visual art used natural pigments made from plants, soil, and minerals, teaching chemistry alongside aesthetics. Every creative project became a multidisciplinary lesson. Physical education was no longer confined to gyms. Balance was learned by crossing shallow streams on stepping stones. Strength developed through climbing, lifting, and building shelters. Endurance grew during long exploratory walks. Students learned to listen to their bodies, respecting limits while discovering hidden strengths. This physical connection to learning improved mental health and emotional stability. Ethics and philosophy found a natural home in these schools. Discussions about fairness emerged while sharing limited resources. Conversations about patience happened while waiting for plants to grow. Responsibility was not taught through lectures, but through experience. When students forgot to care for a garden or protect an area, the consequences were visible and deeply felt. Language teachers noticed something remarkable. Students spoke with more confidence and authenticity. Because they were describing real experiences, not imaginary textbook scenarios, their words carried meaning. English became a bridge to share discoveries with the world. Students recorded documentaries, wrote journals, and collaborated with international peers, all grounded in lived reality. Education authorities initially doubted this approach. They questioned whether students could compete academically. But long-term studies revealed something powerful. Graduates of nature-based schools adapted faster to change, solved problems more creatively, and communicated more clearly than their traditionally educated peers. They didn't just know answers, they knew how to find them. By the time students reached adolescence, their projects became more ambitious. Some designed eco-friendly housing inspired by animal structures. Others developed water purification systems based on natural filtration. These were not simulations, they were real solutions used by surrounding communities. Learning became service, and service deepened learning. As years passed, the first generation educated entirely by nature-based schools entered adulthood. They carried with them a calm confidence shaped by seasons of learning outdoors. Many became scientists, teachers, storytellers, architects, and leaders. But what united them was a shared mindset: cooperation over competition, balance over excess, understanding over control. Universities adapted as well. Instead of massive lecture halls, higher education campuses became ecological research villages. Students specialized not only in subjects but in environments: forests, oceans, deserts, and urban ecosystems. Degrees were earned through contribution, restoring damaged land, educating communities, and developing sustainable systems. One of the most profound impacts of these schools was the revival of empathy. Students raised alongside nature developed a deep sensitivity to life in all forms. Conflict resolution was taught through observing ecosystems, how balance is maintained, how diversity strengthens survival. These lessons translated into better teamwork, stronger communication, and more peaceful societies. Technology continued to evolve, but always with restraint. AI systems learned from nature's efficiency, minimizing waste and energy use. Students were taught to question technology's purpose. Does this tool serve life? Does it increase understanding? If not, it was redesigned or abandoned. Innovation was guided by wisdom rather than speed. Global challenges such as climate change, resource scarcity, and social inequality were addressed differently by this generation. Instead of reacting with fear, they responded with patience and systems thinking. They understood that quick fixes rarely worked and that sustainable solutions required observation, adaptation, and time. Lessons learned from watching forests recover and rivers heal. Storytelling remained central. Around evening fires or digital global forums, people shared stories of learning, how a storm taught humility, how a broken ecosystem taught responsibility, how cooperation saved a project from failure. These stories preserved knowledge in a human way, reminding future generations where wisdom truly came from. Children in these schools grew up knowing that learning never ended. Graduation was not a final step, but a transition into lifelong curiosity. Adults return to learning spaces often, mentoring younger students or simply reconnecting with the land that once taught them so much. In a world once dominated by noise, speed, and separation, these future schools restored something ancient and essential: connection. Connection to the earth, to one another, and to the self. Education was no longer preparation for life, it was life. And as long as the wind continued to move through trees, water flowed across stone, and sunlight touched the soil, the greatest teacher remained present, patiently guiding every generation willing to learn.